Good evening to you all. It is time to go back to ashes. Every night we must return to our slumber in order to rest and arise a stronger and better person than we were the day prior. Lay back, get warm, and relax. Tonight's stories focus on the paranormal. Let's get started, shall we? This happened 3 years ago when I was in high school. My school is very far from my home, so I ride the train. Sometimes a friend would go with me. We would usually encounter our classmate along with her boyfriend in front of us. We never really spoke with each other, but we know it's them because of their size differences. Her height. Our classmate is a girl and she's very small. Smaller than the average small height. I think she's around my chest level, and I'm just around 156 centimeters. She also has curly hair, which is rare in my country. Her boyfriend is tall and big. My friend and I would always try and walk past them on the way to the train. We never greet them because we're too shy. One day, we had a group project over at another classmate's house. That girl classmate was also invited. We started getting to know each other, and she told me that she thinks I'm cool and wants to be friends with me, and that she would always see me entering the school at around 9 a.m., but she's too shy to approach me. I went silent, because as far as I know, I'm always late for class. I would be at the school at around 12 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. Never too early. I told her that it wasn't me, but she told me that it really was me. She told me the details of how I would get off my ride and cross the highway running like a penguin. Well, she's actually right. Everyone tells me that I run like a penguin when I have a backpack on. She continued explaining. I wore a blue hoodie, black yellow Adidas bag, and a huge black headphones, so it would be easy to identify me. Our country has a hot weather, and no one would wear stupid hoodies during daytime, except me. I then told her about how my friend and I saw her and her boyfriend every day after school on the way to the train station. She looked at me weirdly and told us that it wasn't them, and that they actually go the opposite way. They don't have anything to do on the way to the train station. Chills. I defended what I said and told her that it's them. I know that her boyfriend wears white glasses, and that's also rare because I haven't seen a guy at our school who wears the same glasses. We started exchanging weird looks, and I asked her if she's messing with me. She then texted her boyfriend and asked him about how she would always point out to him that she sees me during 9 a.m. entering the school grounds. She asked her boyfriend what I wore, and he explained clearly. Blue hoodie, black headphone, black yellow bag, running like a penguin across the street. So, they would see me at 9 a.m. entering the school, and I would see them walking to the train station at around 7 p.m. It doesn't make sense. After our conversation happened, those never showed up again. I still think about the incident every day after years. It was a bizarre situation. It continued to happen until we noticed it. It just stopped after we found out about it. I've been with different classmates on the way to the train, so I have other witnesses. We never know why it happened. Was it doppelgangers? What would have happened to us if we approached those things? I think we were lucky that we did not approach them. Who knows what those things are? This story involves an ongoing missing persons case with a fair amount of media attention, so I'm going to use as little detail as possible out of respect for the family. I won't use genders, ages, locations, etc. A little while ago, I got really into the supernatural and wanted to learn how I could see ghosts. I learned about a technique where you can get into a meditative state and soften your gaze so that you can see the energy around you. I was completely shocked when I learned about this technique because I realized that I'd done it all the time as a kid so that I could see my friends that lived in my house. So this knowledge made me recognize that I'd had the ability to see ghosts as a child, and therefore just needed to connect to that ability again. I decided to try it one night, and after a while, a child suddenly appeared to me in my doorway. The image of this child was so freaking vivid that it was crazy, and they were crying, so I automatically began trying to soothe them. I asked them what was wrong, and they said, "Please, you have to help my mom. It wasn't her fault. She didn't do it. Please, you have to help her." I told the child to come to me, and they kept repeating the same messages as they got closer. I asked them what their name and age was, and they told me. They kept crying, so I held their hand as they pleaded with me to help their mother, and then they disappeared. At first, I thought that maybe I had been hallucinating, but my hand that had held theirs was still icy cold, and it was an extremely hot night. So I messaged a friend about the experience, and we both started to Google the name of the child. It turned out that they and another sibling had disappeared a few months earlier, and that their mother was being charged with their murder despite no bodies being found. The image of the child that we found online was identical to the one I'd seen. I had never heard about this case before, and it had occurred in a different country, so I'm still extremely confused as to why the child appeared to me. I've spent a lot of time over the past few years contemplating how I can help this child in the way that they asked me to, and I've watched basically every documentary that has been made about the case. I just don't know what to do because I feel like I'm obligated to help the mother, but there's nothing I can actually do that would be of any benefit. Last year, I contacted a relative of the mother who is the only person that believes she's innocent, and I told them about my story. They said that a professional psychic had also reached out to them with exactly the same information. I guess that's the end of my story, but I just wish that I knew what to do. This is the only time that I've experienced anything like this, and I feel like it's my responsibility to help the mother, but I don't know if there's any way that I can do that. Tonight, I was planning on writing about another one of my many experiences, but have decided to post a question instead. Can animals be changelings? Let me explain the reason for this query. My dog will be 4 in February. He had hurt himself breaking out of his kennel. He is a shepherd mix, so very high energy, crazy, piggy eater, etc. He quite literally ripped the metal bars of his kennel right off, forced his way through, and proceeded to puncture and rip quite a few pieces of skin. Now, there was never an infection, but here's where it gets weird. It has been 2 weeks since that happened. He is healing very well, with only one of the 5 wounds left to fully close. But one night, out of nowhere, a week ago, he became extremely lethargic. My husband and I checked on him throughout the night, as we feared he was not going to make it. He was in a heavy sleep, drowsy, uninterested in food or water, and I had to provide him with pet-safe electrolytes to keep him at least hydrated. As of 5 days ago, he is alert, healthy in every possible way, but he is not the same dog that he once was. You see, he used to get excited, and I do mean stupid excited, every single time my husband got home. He used to sleep in bed with us. He was always so high energy if we didn't make out that day for a walk. He would pace for hours. He loved the dog park, visiting my parents and their dogs. I responded very happily to any cue word that indicated a walk or visit, or even food or potty. But now, since he came close to death and made it, he is very much a changed dog. The vet says nothing is abnormal. However, there is no excitement, no hunger or thirst, unless I stand there and tell him to eat or drink, and no interest or desire to even be in the same room as us. I took him to my parents today to see if that would cheer him up, but nothing. An indifferent reaction to everything. Even his eyes seem different and cold. So, the question is, can changelings also be our beloved pets? I never really brought this up to many people. I've only ever told some of my friends and my cousin. When I was 5, I experienced constant nightmares and strange activities after the deaths of my baby sister and grandpa. My parents had my babysitter who sadly passed away 3 days after birth due to birth malfunctions. I only have 3 memories of that time. Me playing in the child area with my grandma, me receiving some dinosaur books to keep me company, and seeing her for the last time before she was taken off life support. I have no other memories of her. Shortly after she died, my grandpa died as well. I actually spent quite some time with him, but oddly enough, don't have that many memories of him. Shortly after both of their deaths, I started to have constant nightmares and what seemed to be sleep paralysis. I would wake up frozen in my bed. Voices would go off in my head, and my bed would start rapidly spinning. The most vivid memory of this would be the strong pain I would feel in my back that seemed like someone was stabbing me. These dreams would progressively get worse, and the pain I'd feel in my back would become more painful. The voices I'd hear became louder, and eventually I'd start to see figures in my room. Strangely enough, I only had one paranormal experience while living in the apartment I was having these dreams in. It was the middle of the night, and my mom was in the kitchen cooking. The way the apartment was laid out had the kitchen next to a long hallway where the bedrooms were located. I was sitting at the end of the hallway, which was right next to where my mom would have been cooking. I was playing with my stuffed dinosaurs and decided to throw one at the end of the hallway. A strange feeling overcame me, and I could do nothing but sit there in silence and stare at the toy I threw. I can vividly remember the toy sit up and start moving toward me. I wasn't scared, but knew something wasn't right either. I tried to call out to my mom, but couldn't yell as it felt like I was out of breath. As the toy neared me, it fell over, and I could feel myself escape the trance I was in. At that point, I felt nothing. I was still not scared and didn't tell my mom about what had happened. This was the only paranormal thing that happened to me at this apartment, other than my reoccurring lifelike nightmares. About a year into this happening to me, we moved to a duplex further into the city we lived on. There was a small break of the nightmares I had, but they reappeared shortly after. Unlike the ones I had at the previous apartment, these were much more violent and lifelike. The nightmares would usually consist of an order like this. I'd wake up frozen, hearing voices and sweating. I would move my eyes around until I noticed a black figure standing in my room. There would be silence until my blanket would be slowly pulled off of me. A feeling of nausea and dizziness would hit me, and then I could finally sit up, and it would stop. This went on for a year with the same pattern. The worst one I had has always stuck with me. Again, the pattern repeated again, but it didn't stop once I sat up. This time when I did sit up, the voices I heard almost sounded like yelling in my head. I became very hot and extremely dizzy and nauseous. While I was on the same floor as my parents, I did not feel an urge to wake them, but rather run downstairs to the bathroom where I sat over the toilet as if I was going to vomit. My vision felt static somewhat, and the stabbing feeling in my back was extremely painful. The feeling of static I got was very odd. My vision would seem to get darker, but I could see static, if that makes sense. Imagine your vision seeing those floaties we sometimes see, but they're everywhere you look, and they move around like TV static. That's what I would see. This went on for what felt like an eternity. During this, I could not speak. I felt like someone took my breath, and the voice had felt helpless. Thankfully, I ended the night falling asleep on the couch after mostly likely passing out. The nightmares didn't stop until we eventually moved out again to a house in the woods we rented for a couple of years. I was in the 5th grade by then, and surprisingly never experienced any activities like that again in my life. I would have nightmares every now and then, but they were never as scary as the ones I had previously. I never had any paranormal experiences either. I recently brought this up to my cousin, and he told me he felt odd about both the old apartment and duplex I lived in at the time. He said he always felt like there was a bad presence in those houses, which was why he never spent the night. Has anyone else had this feeling as well? I remember it all so vividly, but can never understand why it happened or why it stopped so abruptly. I am a male, 18 years old, a senior in high school. This takes place when I was around 12 years old and is probably the most terrifying night of my entire life. My name is James. My friend is called Jesse. He's around 4 months older than me, but that's unimportant. It was the year 2016. Summer vacation had just started, and I was living my best life on Fallout 4. Jesse's distant grandma, that he never actually met, had passed away the week before, and so his parents were out of town. My mom said he could stay with us while his parents sorted things out in their hometown. Jesse was staying in my room with me, which he loved. We had been the best of friends for as long as I can remember, and we still are. So, as all teens or preteens do, we were intent on sleeping as little as possible each and every night. One night, we decided that we were going to sneak out, not for any malicious purposes. For some reason, we just liked the thrill of knowing that we had been wandering around my block while my parents were asleep and didn't know we were out. My parents were usually too preoccupied with my older brother and sister, since we found out my sister was pregnant. We later found out the baby was my brother's child after Mom had caught them one night completely naked in the living room together. Poor little incest baby. It was probably 1, maybe 2 a.m. when Jesse and I finally got out. We went to the local park and just chilled there for a while. That's when we heard something that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think of it. A woman scream, and it didn't sound like it was that far away from where we were. Immediately, I regretted sneaking out and thought we should run back home. But Jesse wanted to investigate. He said he was worried that someone was getting hurt, and so I reluctantly agreed to search for the source of the scream. We thought the scream came from the other side of this small forest, but we were too afraid to walk through it, and so we walked around the edge of the tree line. That's when we saw a woman crouched over something up ahead. She was facing the other direction, and Jesse called out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She stood but didn't turn to face us and didn't respond either. Her hands looked bloody. We slowly moved toward her. "Ma'am, did you scream? Are you all right?" Jesse said, lightly poking her back. She turned to us and vomited up a liquid. It was dark brown and smelled like rusty metal. Even worse, there was something moving inside the vomit. Maggots, I think. We just froze. Neither of us had any clue what to do. She looked at us with her gaunt face and cloudy eyes, pushed me with surprising force, and just ran into the forest. That's when we saw a rotten dead deer with bite marks. She had been eating the rotten raw deer and seemed like she had been tearing it apart with her hands. How this was even possible, I have no clue. We just looked at each other and ran home. We were so scared that we didn't sleep at all that night. Whoever she was, we never saw her again. Never heard any reports of a crazy woman being found living in the forest. Nothing. We still don't understand what we saw, but all I can say is, I'm thankful she didn't seem to want to harm us. You have to know that I've always been scared to sleep at my grandma's house because it feels like someone was spying on me. Even when I was all alone, but I was okay with it because it was maybe just a feeling. But now I'm getting scared because the stories I'm going to tell you. It's been 2 years since my grandpa passed away, and since my grandma used to claim she could see him, but no one's believed her because we don't believe in ghosts. Things in my family, but once my grandma's nurse came to take care of her, he was in the same room as her, and at the moment he was about to walk through the door, he has seen someone running far away, knowing there were only 2. The other things that happened here was this morning. The nurse got scared, which is totally normal, but my grandma told him, "It's okay, it's my husband. He often does that." Remember that her husband passed away. I wouldn't believe this was real if it was only one of them seeing this, but now there were 2 claiming to see someone. The other thing that happened here was this morning. My mother came to visit my grandma because she cannot do anything alone, like she cannot walk or anything. My mother entered the living room and had seen the plants on the floor. It was on the furniture, which is very high, and the door was full of soil. But you have to know that the door is not near the furniture at all, and my grandma is too short to reach the plants and cannot walk. So, who did it? Do you have any idea what's happening? Hello all. There recently was a thread about what made you believe in ghosts. I will start with the same context many probably have said before, but I was an extremely skeptical individual. I believe that the majority of events that occur can be explained by logical explanations. That was until both myself and wife had our experiences with several unexplainable events. I want to context that these events have changed both my wife and myself's views on many things, including paranormal. Events took place around 6 years ago. Wife and I were staying at my father's house after he passed away. Everyone in the family spoke about the house being haunted as long as I can remember. Personally, never had anything weird happen prior to this, and overall just chalked it up to that side of the family being overzealous or storytellers. We were at the house for around a week to help clean it out, as it was around 6 hours away from where we live. There were several weird events leading to the final event that changed myself and wife forever. To give better context, the house itself was a postage stamp style Victorian house with 2 floors and a semi-finished apartment style attic. First event. I was going up into the attic to work on cleaning out some stuff my father had up there. He was an avid collector of NASCAR diecast and other collectibles, and things were everywhere. On my way up the steps, I was on the phone with my wife who had went to get food. when I saw the handle on the attic door twist and the door slightly open. This area we were in was not necessarily dangerous, but was far from nice. I instantly thought someone had broken in and immediately ran up to investigate. I searched everywhere and could not find anyone. In retrospect, it was idiotic to go up there alone, as if someone was up there. I was not prepared to handle it. Grief makes emotions just dull, including fear. Second event. Wife, myself, and a childhood friend were in the same attic cleaning out items. In the attic, there was a thick old shag carpet that had been there from the 70s. Since it was a semi-finished attic, one room was for storage and is where my buddy was working. I look at my wife, who literally just points at the door. We both watch the door for that room close slowly on my buddy. There was zero reasoning or explanation, as we both saw it, and the door itself took a large amount of force to actually close. Obviously, my buddy was pretty unhappy, and we both just said, "Sorry, forgot you were in there," to avoid him thinking both of us were losing our minds or scare him. Last event. The last night we ever stayed there, we slept on the second floor in the master bedroom. The bedroom itself was positioned so the headrest of the bed's wall was aligned with a set of stairs coming up. The wall and stairs were about 3 to 15 feet difference in height, depending on the location, an important piece to what ended up happening. Throughout the night, my wife kept waking me up to say someone was walking around on the platform landing outside. I looked and did see what looked like a shadow under the doorframe, so I immediately opened the door and braced for what I assumed was an intruder. Again, nothing was there after searching the house extensively. Later that night, I am awakened to sounds of scratching in the wall behind my bed. My wife is awake already and looking at me oddly and terrified as she hears it too. I assume it was a rat or some type of animal. While weird it was directly behind me, would not be a far-fetched possibility, as the house did have critters in it. In a tired rage, I turned around and just punched the wall to scare it off. Within a second, something punches back on the wall with such force it shakes the entire thing. We both then hear footsteps stomping and running away from us and up the attic stairs. At this moment, we are both at a loss for words and immediately pack up with our son and leave. We call the police and just assumed it has to be someone who broke in, until the next day when we started to think about it. The area where the scratching was occurring was above the steps, a good 10 feet, and even an extremely tall man would have had trouble reaching with a ladder. However, even if they could reach, what we couldn't explain is how this thing ran on a floor that literally did not exist. The sound of running was not going up steps, but as if there was a hallway or floor directly behind the wall, which there was not. The police found no signs of a break-in or of any intruder being there. The Ring security cameras outside never had any alerts or saw anyone coming in. We ended up selling the house with everything in it and never stayed over there again. I came down briefly a few weeks later to finish up some final business and just went to tell my father goodbye at the house. Upon entering, the house just felt so hateful. I don't understand how a house could have feelings, but if someone was to ask me what I felt, hateful is the word I would use. I have no idea to this date what any of it means. To clarify, had I not been in such a state of grief, I would have never investigated nor stayed after the first event. My dad always brushed off the other family members' claims to it being haunted as no big deal. And even in my childhood years visiting, I never once had an odd experience. My dad and I had a good relationship throughout his life, and he never talked about the house in a negative light. The house was built in 1879 by a French family, and after them, my family owned it from 1952 and on. Nothing traumatic ever happened there, nor any weird family events. It was just a plain, old, boring house prior to that week. How has anyone else coped with a truly unexplainable event? My wife and I still to this day cannot even talk about it without getting chills or feeling literally insane. This happened when I was about 11, and I've always wondered what it might have been. I was out playing with all the other neighborhood kids on a summer night. It was dark out, so maybe 8 or 9. We were all gathered on someone's deck at one point, and it outlooked some woods. They weren't very big woods, just like a large barrier between different houses and streets. Someone pointed out the blinking light in the woods, and we all saw this. There were somewhere between 7 to 12 of us, so I know this definitely happened. It wasn't just a trick on my eyes. There was a floating yellowish orb of light in the woods. It was quite far away from us and had to be smaller than a basketball, but much bigger than a softball. It would turn on and glow for a couple seconds, then turn off, and you wouldn't see it. It had to be floating maybe 6 to 8 feet off the ground. And it was moving, coming down a hill further into the woods. Not toward us, though. Every couple seconds, the light would appear further down the hill. It was moving at a walking pace. It definitely wasn't a person with a lantern. It was too far off the ground, and the shape and size of the light was unlike any lantern I could even imagine. Also, the houses back in there were totally quiet, and what reason would anyone have to go down into the woods that late? It was also far too big to have been a firefly. Do you have any idea what it could possibly be? Several years ago, when my family moved to our old house from a different neighborhood, we had been given about almost 12.5 paintings of owls with varying art styles, but had a few things in common, such as dark, unsaturated colors in a nighttime setting. They were apparently original paintings that we didn't know the origin of, besides the dates that were written on some of the paintings. The ladies that gave us these paintings, at least according to my father, she really wanted these paintings gone and made sure that they were gone by stopping by our house and dropping them off. For the entirety that we lived there, every person that visited our house would point out how creepy those paintings were. And at one point in time, the mother of one of my best friends outright refused to use the bathroom in the hallway where those owl pictures were. I can recount several times at night passing by that hallway, feeling unusual coldness. I am not exaggerating when I say this, but these paintings were absolutely dreadful. My father and our family's friends had tried to convince my mother to get rid of these paintings, but she outright refused to because they looked beautiful. My father had explained to me how he saw weird figures at night, sometimes in the corner of the hallway, and once, when I was young, in my bedroom. I vividly remember how this hallway felt a lot longer than it actually was due to these pictures, and at times it felt like the owl's eyes would follow you. When we began moving out, my father finally had convinced my mother to get rid of those photos, and we ended up selling them at a garage sale. When I was a child, I was really scared of the dark. One time I stayed at my grandparents' house. We were watching TV in the living room. From the living room, there was a hallway with 2 bedrooms on each side, and hallway that led to the kitchen near the front door. The bedroom doors were always open, and it was really dark in the hallway, so I was always scared to go down there alone. I never told anyone about my fears, and never asked someone to walk with me to the dark rooms to the light switch. I got really thirsty at one point, and battling my fears, got up and went to the kitchen. I turned the light switch on, poured myself a glass of water, and while doing so, I noticed something very weird happening, though at the time, my brain didn't comprehend the weirdness of it. The lower corner of a curtain on a window that was right in front of me lifted up slightly, and I witnessed a hand on the other side of the window reach and knock on the window pane. I remember running back to the living room, telling my grandpa that someone was in our yard. We had a really low fence at the time, which could easily be unlocked from the outside. So my grandpa was really worried about what I said. He grabbed a flashlight, walked around our house, returned, and said that there was no one there. He asked what I saw, and I said that someone knocked on a window, completely forgetting the part where the curtain lifted by itself to show that hand knocking. As I said, my brain accepted it as normal for some reason. Sometime later, I remembered this detail and was startled by it. I would have believed I dreamed the whole thing, but I remember my grandpa checking around the house and talking to me about it. At that time, I even thought that it was our neighbor that came to ask for something, so I wasn't really scared. I didn't think much of it. I could write it off as imagination of a scared child. But my fear of the dark never produced any hallucinations, visionary or auditory. I tend to think that it was my imagination after all. But it's a really weird experience. Nothing similar to this ever happened after that. In the 1970s, I lived in a little old building over a hang glider shop. You had to go up a flight of stairs to get to my apartment, and the yard was all gravel. So my coworker Raleigh and I were up late in the shop doing inventory, which involved counting each and every bolt cutter, pin, etc., in the boxes on our supply shelf. We were just talking and counting. About 1 a.m., we both heard heavy footsteps going up the wooden stairs to my place, but they stopped halfway up, and then nothing. Raleigh and I came out to look. Nobody was on the stairs, and nobody was in my apartment. The weird thing was, if a person had gone halfway up and then jumped off, we would have heard them land on the gravel. That didn't happen. Nobody was there at all. I found out later that the guy who lived there before me died in a hang gliding accident. Maybe he was trying to come home. I don't know. I still don't know. But this is why I don't just discount paranormal accounts. Sometimes things happen that just cannot be explained. About 2 weeks ago, I had a feeling of uneasiness and a sense of dread over me. Maybe anxiety, but I also had these dreams of people. At least I think that's what they were. They were clothed, but had pale skin, no sense of hair anywhere on them, and I had horrible feelings when I saw them in my dreams. And two things showed up behind them. This odd triangular symbol with a letter in the middle and a ram's skull. I am not satanic, I am Catholic, but the feeling these figures gave off was very dark and evil. They had horrifying smiles. I hated every second of the dreams. It was constant for that week. Every time I woke up from these, I felt disgusted and sick. This past week, my dad was being followed by a man, bald, pale skin, driving a Ram truck. The way my dad described the man was demonic, evil, inhuman. He said the man had the face of a devil. I asked about the truck. He said it was all black with a strange triangle shape on the rear window. I asked him to draw it. It matched the one in my dream. I looked it up. It was a Freemason symbol. I told him about the dream. We talked to a priest. The priest said that Freemasons were satanic in practice. I saw multiple of these people. I'm scared there's going to be more who will do worse things. I know I sound like a crazy person with the people following me and my dad, but the energy wasn't good. I just know it isn't. When I was 7 years old, my dad was putting me to bed, but I wasn't tired. I played with some toys I had, but eventually went to bed. I used to sleep with my door open, but after this, never again. I was beginning to fall asleep and I turned over on my side, looking at my doorway. There, I saw it. Just a completely black figure standing in my door. The unsettling part, thinking back, is that we had a hall light, but it showed no detail. It didn't move a muscle. Its chest didn't move, so it didn't appear to be breathing. It was weird. I wasn't afraid of whatever it was. It was oddly calming. It wasn't anything freaky either. Just a silhouette of a man, about 6'2". Not the height of my dad. I've seen the height of my dad in my doorway, but this wasn't it. I turned over in my bed and looked back over, and it was gone. No sound of footsteps or breathing. Just gone. I went to school the next day and told my friends about it, and 2 of them claimed to have seen the same thing. Pretty offsetting looking back, knowing I don't have sleep paralysis, and my friends had seen it too. I never saw it again. I worked third shift, and I worked a half a night a few days ago, which meant I was driving home around 3:30 and 4 in the morning. I've been driving the same route for years and know the area well, and because I do a lot of night driving, I'm very familiar with how the area looks in the dark, especially since it's a fairly rural drive and we have a large deer population, so I try to be very aware of my surroundings at night. I say all this as a preface to drive home the fact that I fully, truly know that whatever I saw was at least out of the ordinary, if not paranormal, because 90% of my driving is done under the circumstances, so I'm not inclined to think it was just my eyes or mind playing tricks on me. So I was turning at a 4-way stop to head into town. There are a couple homes and businesses at the intersection, but it's mostly fields. So as I'm turning, I instinctively scan once I'm through the intersection for deer, since it's not uncommon for them to be crossing the road in that area. I'm glancing to the left and I see something. There aren't cars around, so I slow down a bit and get a closer look. Again, fully expecting a deer. What I saw was a very tall, unnaturally thin, all-white humanoid figure. It had to have been 8 feet tall, and its arms were longer than a human's. Its wrists were a little past its knees. It was walking from the field toward the road and my car. And while it was kind of lumbering, it was moving quick and covering a lot of ground due to its size. It was a little hunched in its posture, but was walking in a very deliberate way. It was in the field probably 20 feet from the road when I first saw it. I immediately was hit with the absolute wave of terror that I've never felt. Not just I'm seeing something weird in the middle of the night scared, but this thing can, will, and wants to kill me scared. I immediately hit the gas. By this point, it was nearing the shoulder of the road, and when I checked my mirrors, it was gone. Full disclosure, I do have anxiety disorder and panic disorder, so I am susceptible to sudden onset panic attacks. But this was a completely different type of fear. It felt targeted almost, like it was explicitly causing me to feel fear, maybe in hopes that I would experience fight, flight, or freeze, and go with freeze. But if it was that powerful, why would it need to toy with me? I have no clue what it was. Google hasn't been helpful, and I'm too embarrassed to tell anyone in real life. Has anyone had any advice or similar experiences? November 13th, 2011 is when my mom went crazy. My parents were married for 21 years. My mom has always had her demons, but for a long time, she at least tried. Sometime in 2006 or 2007, after I went off to college, she went off her meds for depression for the 45,992nd time. This time was different. I didn't realize what mania looked like at the time. I was only 18. But years later, I realized she has an adult onset of bipolar disorder. It was unnerving. It was the last straw for my dad, and he left. The divorce was finalized in 2008. My mom was never the same. A combination of borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder, both diagnosed, meant watching her go up and down on a haunting roller coaster of destruction, meant watching the small part of her that was a mother fade away. My dad left her the house, the one we had lived in all my life. It's a beautiful home, cozy, and on the corner there's a big bay window and natural light. It always felt like home until the divorce. I hated being in the house after my dad left. Her behavior became more erratic, and the lows became so much lower, and the house began to change. It was dark and stale, and you couldn't wait to leave. I've always chalked it up to be my perception as a young adult, weathering a divorce and my mom's downward spiral. But now, I don't know. It got worse and worse over time, and then I got the phone call on November 13th, 2011. I was living in another city. The call was from my father, telling me a neighbor noticed he hadn't seen my dog in the bay window for several days and decided to use the spare key my mother had given him. The dog was found dead in the bathroom, and my mother in bed, weak and frail. She had laid in the bed for so long her leg muscles had atrophied. The dog I've never been able to get answers on, but my sister once let it slip that there was blood. The cleaners my aunt hired to clean the house found my cat 3 days into the job, crushed to death between the ottoman and chair in the back room. She spent the next few years in a catatonic state, first in the mental hospital, and then she was transferred to a nursing home. In the meantime, I was the one to clean up the house. She was a shopaholic hoarder, and mental illness had only amplified it. The first time I came back home, it felt dark and stale, but it was empty. It didn't have the panic pressure that I had felt with my mother there. I sorted and cleaned, sorted and cleaned, sorted and cleaned. The more I did this, the lighter and brighter it became, until it felt like home again. Not really, but kind of. There was always a little bit of stillness there, but I attributed, and perhaps still do, it to my subconscious awareness of what had happened there. One thing I noticed about the house was that the lightness could become dark in the blink of an eye, and everything was gradual. if that makes sense. You never notice things until you are consumed by the still darkness. It was like a cloak coming over the place in one steady sweep. It was odd, but how can you explain it? I had a boyfriend. Our relationship wasn't exactly healthy to begin with, but I will say that he noticed the same things I did with the house. There were 3 specific incidents with that house. First incident. One day, it was me, him, and one of his friends sitting in the middle room when we heard the distinct sound of the front door opening. They went to go check, and it was closed with no sign of being opened. The thing about the door is that, as it was old like the rest of the house, the door had become difficult to open and close. In order to open it, you had to put your shoulder into it. But in order to close it, you had to thrust your body weight against it several times before it would shut. We heard it open, but we never heard it shut. This was impossible. 3 people heard the exact same thing. The second incident. My ex and I were sitting in the middle room once again. We were sitting in our office chairs at our desks talking about something when we distinctly heard several creaks overhead and a sudden smash directly, and I mean directly, over my head in the attic. It was as if someone took several steps until they were overhead and had either a plate or glass bong, that very specific glass shattering sound, and threw it with a great force. The sound was so incredibly clear. My ex and I locked eyes with each other, and he whispered, "There's someone in the attic." I was gone. I bolted out to the garage and backed my car out and parked in the driveway. My ex came out to meet me and convinced me to stay where I was in the car as he called his best friend, the same one who heard the front door open and not open, and asked him to come with his gun so they could search the attic. His best friend arrived in less than 2 minutes with his weapon. They both went inside the house and searched the place from top to bottom as I sat in the driveway. The way this home was set up was it was on a corner lot. The side gate faced the street, and there was a bay window that wrapped around the house and stretched almost to the front door. We still had the blinds pulled up. This meant that from my vantage point, I could still see inside half of the house. And if someone exited through the only 2 exits in the home, the front door and the side gate, I could even see the back fence from where I was. I would see them. I could see the roof. It was not a large home. I would be able to see if anyone was making an escape. As I waited for the boys to return, I half expected to see a homeless man scramble out of the house. It was the only thing that could explain the sound of something being thrown right above my head. The boys completed the search of the home. Nothing and no one was to be found. I asked if they had checked the attic. Thoroughly, they said. I believed them. The thing about the attic of that house is that it wasn't a true attic. The rafters were set up in such a way that a person could not walk around freely up there. If they did, they would fall through the ceiling. There was a light switch up there, and the boys had examined every square inch of the attic. There was no sign of life to be found. No glass. Nothing. It would be easy to write it off as a strange sound the old house had made if it wasn't for one thing my boyfriend was insistent on: the footsteps he had heard leading up to the crash. He was adamant he had heard the footsteps above him as they walked to the spot right above me. He had heard the wood slightly creak as if something had lifted its arms up to throw something with force. I wear hearing aids, so I miss out on a lot of sounds, but I had heard creaking before the smash, and I knew by then when my boyfriend was being sincere. I believe him even to this day as to hearing those footsteps. The third incident. We were in the house for 2 to 3 years. I split my time between there and down south for college. My boyfriend stayed behind in the house. He would mention that there were times he just knew he wasn't alone, but no other specific incidents took place. The house began to get darker. Our fights grew worse and more violent. Something happened to my mind. It all happened gradually until it was horrible, a point of no return. To this day, the depression I felt there is like nothing I have ever experienced before. It changed me. After one particularly savage fight, I went for a drive and came back. I was alone. He was not there. I entered through the back door and was greeted by a wall of darkness. It was stale, cold, dark. Even though all the lights were on, you could barely breathe. I snapped. I yelled at the darkness in the kitchen for no particular reason. Get the freak out. Go away. I see you. Go. I'm sick of you. It retreated. I swear to you on my son, I visibly saw the darkness shift backwards. I screamed at it some more, and it retreated some more. There was light again. The house was light and beautiful again. My memory stops there, in the kitchen screaming at the darkness. Then I wake up in my bed, fully clothed, on top of the sheets. The house is dark again. The stillness is there again. But when I walk into the kitchen, it is light and bright. Oddly enough, that was the first time I considered the possibility that there might be something more to the house, that there might be something outworldly there. But what? Not too long after the incident in the kitchen, I left the house and it was put up for sale. I have been through many tough and trying times since then, but I have never, ever experienced the darkness, the sluggishness, the stillness, the pressure, the panic, the hopelessness, the bleakness, and the agony of that home since then. My gut tells me that there's something there. The rationalism is willing to concede that it could all be subconsciously rooted in the pain associated with the home's history. But I feel that there truly is or was something dark and dangerous within the home. And I only wonder if it was there when my mother moved in with my father, or if she created it with her downward spiral. I had a reoccurring dream while in that house. I would walk into the middle room and see something that resembled a cross between the creature from Alien and Predator, and it would lock eyes with me, and I would hear in my mind, "Widow Sullivan," and the dream would end. There is no one in my family with the name Sullivan, and I am unsure if it's connected. Probably not. But I never had that dream again after leaving the home. I've never been able to really explain what might be in there. It didn't seem to fit typical ghost tales. I'm not sure why I wonder if my mother created it. It's just something that popped in my head every time I think about that house. I am open to any of your thoughts. So, today is Sunday, a day I usually go out to hike a route I hiked many, many times. I don't anymore. But I had to think of it today. This experience is roughly 2.5 years old now, and I haven't gone back to my old routine since then. I live in a pretty small rural village in Germany. Less than 200 people live there. Not much around here besides fields, forests, cows, sheep, a donkey, and 2 horses. Directly outside of the house I live in is a road to the right which leads into a field and then into a pretty thick forest. The route I usually take is around 18 kilometers long, or 11 miles for the US readers. I will simply stick to miles to keep it simple. It doesn't sound like much, but the route is very rough. It's uphill almost the entire time, and the forest has no roads, so you actually walk through rough terrain with thick tree roots and bushes, etc. Anyway, I walk this exact route 1 to 2 times per week, and usually when it's already dark outside. I wear a headlamp for when it's too cloudy out and the moon isn't nicely visible, so I don't trip or get hurt. Why at evening or night? Because I'm usually on the phone with a good friend talking. We live very far apart. It's day for her when it's night for me. I don't mind, because that way I don't feel alone hiking. Here is an info dump, because I deem it important. For people who are not familiar with German forests, the most dangerous thing you may encounter is a wild boar, so it's usually pretty safe to just wander around. Almost no wolves where I am, and even if, they would be way too shy to just show themselves. Bears are not a thing here. Also, no crazy people living inside the forest. The only thing you encounter is the farmer who drives up like 1 to 2 miles into the road to check on his livestock. After that, it's all forests, no fields anymore anyway. Now, to the weird thing I experienced. Headlamp on, AirPods in, talking to my friend, catching up. For the first 5 miles or so, nothing weird happened. I even had the headlamp off, though I wore it on my head. The moon was making enough light, and once your eyes adjust to the dark, you can see quite well, as long as you don't sprint around the forest. Though once I was in the deeper part of the forest, my AirPods started making weird sounds, almost like I was losing connection. But I could hear her voice still. It was more like a background buzzing. It wasn't actually interfering with my call. This buzzing went on, and after 20 minutes or so, I suddenly noticed that I couldn't see as well anymore as I could. The moon was blocked by clouds, but these clouds didn't look like normal clouds. They looked like thick walls of fog just way higher up than fog should be. I know it's hard to picture, but clouds usually look fluffy or thinned out. These seemed heavy and wet. It's hard to describe. I told my friend to hold on for a minute because I had to focus on something. I don't know why I said that, but focusing on her talk was disrupting my view for whatever reason. Sensory overload, I guess. The thing I had to focus on was a huge, thick, deep black cloud. It kind of pushed itself through the fog like clouds and positioned itself right over me. Almost as if it was trying to throw a shadow around an area I was in. The cloud also started to swirl in the middle slightly, and that was when my connection just fell flat. I got the beeping sound you get when you lose connection, and gone was my phone call. No more bars, no mobile data, nothing. But my AirPods were still buzzing like crazy in my ears. That's when I felt uneasy. Neck hair standing up, cold sweats on my back, and I started turning around to leave, because the way ahead just seemed a lot more dark and sinister than my way back. The moment I turned around and started, slightly jogging back because I felt scared, was when I started to hear bell sounds. Almost like church bells, but the sound was deeper. That typical ring you hear after a bell sound was just stuck in the air, and it was giving me this weird sensation, as if my bones were suddenly rubbing against each other. It was extremely freaky. All I remember is that I started to go from walking back, to jogging back, to running back, trying to leave the forest and go back to the fields where you start. I didn't look back while running, but I could hear the bell sound getting weaker the further away I got, and the fog-like clouds were becoming less and less until I finally left the forest and I was back to a normal sky, thin clouds and the moon. Once I got back home, I simply undressed, went into the shower, and went to bed, thinking I just simply got spooked today, or maybe I was exhausted and my brain went haywire. I don't know. But I never saw a cloud like that in my life, and church bells are not a thing late at night inside a forest. I never went back to hike that route. I never told anyone, because I'm a bit embarrassed. But I had to think of it today. So, I'm a college student, and all the residential areas on campus have a different name: Highland, Park, Historic, and North. I chose to live in the Historic District because it was the one with the most greenery. It was close to all my classes, and my brother stayed in the same dorm when he went to my uni. I live on floor 3 of 3 at my dorm, and I noticed something really odd shortly after moving in. There's an intercom right on the wall at the foot of my bed. I inquired about it at the front desk, asking if it was hooked to the desk or campus security, anything like that. The desk assistant had no clue what I was talking about and directed me to the most popular RA in the building. I asked him about the intercom, and he told me the story as follows. Back in the day, the rooms had intercoms that went to the basement. Not sure why the basement, but the basements of the historic dorms are closed after someone unalived themselves in their back in the day. There's also rumors that they connect to the bomb shelter under campus, but I don't know. I was aware of the bomb shelters. We have staircases that lead down at random spots all over campus, one just outside and to the right of my dorm. And you can even hear the pressure release from them about every half hour to an hour. But this intercom thing spooked me, so I chose to ignore it. My roommate and I had pretty opposite schedules, so we were rarely in the room together. Weird stuff would happen to us, though. I'd be working at my desk and hear a woman go, "Hello?" who was assumed was my roommate or friend from down the hall. But I'd turn around, and he wasn't there. My closet is about 2 feet from the intercom, and sometimes I'd hear the doorknob turn. It's all good stuff in this dorm. Everything creaks. My roommate would text me asking if I forgot my keys, and was knocking on the door, which obviously I wasn't. There was even a time where we both in the room, and a huge bang hit the door, right next to the intercom. We freaked out, looked through the peephole, but saw no one. We slowly opened the door to look down the hall, and because we're in the center, there isn't anywhere to run. But no one would be there. My roommate broke her leg a month into the school year and had to drop out, leaving me all on my own. These weird occurrences would happen, so I spent a lot of time in my friend's room, only ever sleeping in mine. Eventually, we migrated to hanging out in my room, but my friends would always comment about how bad the energy was. It seemed to subside after a bit. There are still some days I walk in, and it's absolutely draining in there. There have even been instances when my boyfriend and I are about to fall asleep and he'll say, "What do you mean?" And I ask confused what he's talking about, and he'll say, "Didn't you just say..." Some weird clicking, almost like a telegraph, started coming from the intercom around October. I asked the RA about it, and he assured me the intercom was disconnected. I started making more friends, meaning I was in more rooms in my building, and the more I spent time elsewhere, the more I realized my room is the only room with an intercom. I have a picture of it, and I'll try to attach it in the comments or something. But even as I write this, I have an uneasy feeling like I shouldn't be telling you this. This thing happened on a holiday in Ibiza in the summer of 2018. I've always been pretty skeptical about ghosts, etc., but this thing really made me see it differently. The reason I'm posting it is because I came across it again after sending my experience to a friend back then. I stayed with my parents in an old and dated looking hotel build, probably somewhere in the 50s or 60s. The 2-bedroom apartment had a dismantled fireplace in it, and the doors were rigid and had vintage but sturdy knobs. The apartment has this key card holder in order to have electricity in the apartment. And at the first day of our holiday, I put a piece of cardboard in the holder so we don't need to put our key card in it every time. One of the last days of our holiday came to an end, and I went to bed. My room was located right behind the entrance, and my bedroom window was looking out on the hallway. I went to sleep, but eventually I woke up around 5 a.m. I had this weird dream, one that I never had before. As I was rethinking what just happened in my dream, I wanted to move my head, but to my horror, it was really painful as I had a stiff neck. Luckily, I could move it enough, and I managed to turn on the lamp on the nightstand. I looked at my phone to see what time it was, and I also tried to ease the stiff neck a bit, but that didn't help. Eventually, I turned the lamp off and went back to sleep. About 5 minutes later, for no reason, I was just blankly staring into the room full of darkness and a tiny bit of light coming through the curtains. I looked around a bit, but then I looked to my left, and in the corner of the room, I saw a black shadow-like figure standing there, looking at me. In that moment, I was just totally paralyzed and kept on looking at it. Then it began to move to the right and disappeared, walking through the bedroom door. After it disappeared, I immediately turned on the lamp on the nightstand, but to my horror, it didn't work. There was no power. I then grabbed my phone that luckily had a few percentages of power left in it, and I turned on the flashlight. Instantly, I thought about the cardboard and the key card holder. And with my phone flashlight, I opened the rigid door and went to check the key card holder. The cardboard was still in its place, but it had moved up a little because when I pressed it down, the power came back. I realized that in the corner where I saw the black shadow standing, the entrance is located behind the wall, and that wall also holds the key card holder. So, the weird dream, stiff neck, no power, even though 5 minutes before there was, and the location of the shadow and key card holder makes it hard for me to believe that this was just a big chain of coincidences. Nothing like this ever happened again to me. I was visiting my ex, who lived in a super old house. It had been a hotel, brothel, store, and a funeral home in its former life. At this point, it is a home that looks so beautiful if you could only see the beautiful architecture and grand wallpaper as they used to be. Instead, the house looks as if it had been forgotten for some time. Dust and cobwebs are visible on every surface, but especially on the deep mahogany carved trim that encircled every room and sometimes protruded into elaborate carvings of guardian protectors. It was unnerving to be in this home at any time. The hair on the back of your neck would stand every time you switched rooms, as if you had walked in on something that couldn't be seen. That feeling is something you can get used to, though. It's a feeling that fades quickly and grows comfortable after a while. This was a feeling that you didn't mind because it didn't trigger any emotion. It was just more of a reminder that some people are unseen. At night, the house was a different story. Not often, but some nights the house after the sunset felt different. It filled with tension. You could feel the hair on your neck stand, but the energy of someone being there is much different. This feeling causes goosebumps. It's uncomfortable, tension-filled and chilling. This feeling doesn't fade and sometimes returns just from mentions of the stories I encountered. Not lasting as long as before, but definitely there. This night, I went over because my boyfriend's parents and siblings had gone out of town and needed us to dog sit. We hung around the house and watched TV. That night, we decided we would travel to the upstairs back hall just to scare ourselves. The house felt quieter than normal that day. We were worried we might not see anything in the back hall, like all of the last spirits were on vacation. That night, it changed. Everyone knows this house is haunted, there is no doubt. But, as you climb the stairs to the second story, you are met with another level of paranormal. Almost constantly, you hear things that don't make sense. You feel that negative tension in the air, and you catch things out of the corner of your eye that you can't find reasoning for. To add a little extra spice, the upstairs had lost all of its electricity several years prior. Instead, they had extension cords running to the 3 main bedrooms. The upstairs is split into 2 parts. One of the parts is at the top of the staircase. It opens to 3 main bedrooms, each with a giant door made of solid wood and sharing the same grand crown molding as the downstairs. Immediately to the left of the staircase was another identical door. This door leads to a hallway. The hallway has a few rooms and a bathroom. Room numbers still grace the front of each door to let hotel guests know which room would be accommodating them for the evening. As the sun went down, we got excited to go exploring and maybe dig up some trouble. We lived for the adrenaline of it. Get a little spook in. As we went up the stairs, things felt different. Even in the dark, nothing was happening. Just like earlier in the day, the house was quiet. It just felt like we were in any old house. No goosebumps, no presence of another, no noise, nothing. As we turned the knob and opened the door to the back hallway, it changed immediately. Suddenly, all around us was a presence of darkness and a feeling of terror. We immediately had the same thought. No! We closed the door, and almost immediately the air cleared of the terrible feeling it had presented just moments earlier. Since the house felt so calm, we decided to spend some time in my boyfriend's bedroom upstairs. As we lay there watching a movie, the lights flickered. Not uncommon because of the extension cord fire hazard that ran from the living room and up the stairs. The flicker brought with it that horrible presence we had felt opening the back hallway door, rushing back to us. As we glanced at each other in terror, the lights flickered once more, and a loud crash came from outside the door, and repetitive beats, like a toddler running, pounding loudly in the hallway, directly outside of the room. Only 5 or 6 steps, but incredibly loud. As soon as the pounding footfalls stopped, the air changed to normal again. We sat catching our breath together for what seemed like forever. Neither of us sang a word. When we did speak, we decided we should leave for the night. The dog would be fine until morning. Upon opening the door to his bedroom to get out of the house, we heard a crunch. Lifting his shoe, We noticed that my ex had just stepped in broken glass. Upon further investigation, we realized it wasn't just broken glass. It was broken Christmas bulbs. These are special ornaments his mom puts up every year and keeps in special ornament totes with locking lids to prevent breakage. Those totes are behind a closed door, down a hallway, and inside a room that also had a closed door away from where they now lay at our feet. We immediately left. I'm a 19-year-old currently doing my first year in an art school in Singapore. Before attending this school, I've heard a lot of stories about this school, like students hearing soldiers marching in the building at 9 p.m., women crying in the toilets, and people running in the school building even though it's already 12 midnight. However, I always thought of a realistic explanation in these stories. Come on, it's an art school. Those marching footsteps could be the dance students. Crying in the toilet is common because of the stress students get from the assignments, and running at 12 midnight? I did that a few times to run away from the guards because I couldn't use my own laptop to do my assignments, so I stayed in the school's computer labs to do them. But on November 18th, 2022, something horrifying happened that changed my mind. It was a Friday night, and there weren't a lot of students in the building. My school is located at the heart of the busiest location in Singapore. Clubs and bars were nearby. We're surrounded by hotels, and we're pretty much surrounded by iconic places and malls. So, most students are out to party, especially because it was the last day of the semester. I was in my classroom, alone, doing my assignments. I was already having a bad day, and I did not bother going to a cafe or just going home to do my work because I really needed to smoke from time to time. I wasn't smoking cigarettes, of course. My classroom could have detected that, but I always bring a vape with me to smoke it while I'm alone in class. Living in a strict country and home, I am not allowed to vape at all, hence why I'm doing my assignments in the classroom. I looked at the time and it was already 10:30 p.m. I was surprised the guards didn't even bother going up to check if students left the property already. I debated if I should stay or leave later and catch the last train. I stayed, somehow, and continued doing my essay. A while later, I heard someone trying to open the door. The door isn't locked or anything. It can only be opened with the staff and student ID cards. I looked at the glass panel of the door, and I didn't see anyone. I opened the door, and I didn't see anyone. It's impossible for someone to run and hide. It takes quite a while to find a place to hide because it's an open space. At that point, I was still not creeped out as I was stressed with the assignments. It happened again, but this time, I saw a creepy face in the panel looking straight at me. Its eyes were wide open, a huge grin on its face, and the rest of the face was just pitch black. I froze, not knowing if I should look away, but at this point, this thing knew I could see it. I reached for my phone slowly while looking at it, not blinking at all. It watched my movements intensely. The door handle shook again, and I have never been so thankful of the card function for the door. I quickly called my boyfriend, who was at a gig nearby, and frantically asked him to come to my school to fetch me. This thing wouldn't go away, and at this point, I keep asking myself if that was human with a mask, but its features moved naturally. My boyfriend FaceTimed me this time, and I looked at the screen to look at where he was at. I looked up again, and the face wasn't there anymore. I looked at the screen, and I could see my boyfriend reaching the classroom. The door shook again, but this time, it was my boyfriend. I opened the door and hugged him. I was shaking so bad, and the whole time we hugged, he calmed down and told me he didn't see anything, so we were safe now. We packed my bag and immediately left the building. We have this belief where if a ghost or a spirit shows itself to you, you are not allowed to go home immediately, as it will follow you. Instead of catching the last train, my boyfriend and I decided to sit at a nearby coffee shop and eat supper. Though it happened recently, I don't know what that was, and I am never staying in the classroom late at night alone, ever again. This concludes tonight's stories. While you slumber, remember, you will wake to a brand new day. You will be stronger and a better person. Just like a newborn phoenix, stay bright, for that is the reason we all must go back to ashes. Sleep well, and I look forward to reading to you again.